Do you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. On behalf of the European Institute of Romania, let me welcome you to our conference today. It is my privilege to introduce you the new series of debates that our institute has recently developed, namely European News in the Spotlight. With this series of online events, we aim to inform the general public about the main topics on the European agenda and the importance that the Council of the European Union has in coordinating the policies of the member states in specific areas. At the same time, I should say that our goal is to connect experts and specialists from Romania and experts from the EU in this framework of debates, making somehow the link to the agenda of the current EU Council presidency. In a way, we continue the series of around 20 events that our institute has organized last year and in the beginning of this year within the conference on the future of Europe. We learned, naturally, I would say, that the main topics of concern of the EU citizens in general are also priorities on the Council's presidency's agenda. Given that in this semester, the Czech Republic holds the presidency of the Council, we are honored to have the Embassy of Romania in the Czech Republic as partner in today's event. Let me use this opportunity to express our thanks to Her Excellency Mrs. Antoaneta Barta for the cooperation and participation today. At the same time, let me also mention our wish to continue this series of debates in partnership with the other Romanian embassies in the EU member states, taking into account the future presidencies of the Council. As you know, under the Czech presidency, energy is one of the priorities, focusing on ensuring energy security, while also advancing on the path towards green transition and coping with the social and economic costs of the crisis. Without extending the introductory comments, allow me to give the floor to Mrs. Antoaneta Barta, the Romanian ambassador to the Czech Republic. Your Excellency, please, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me. Good morning from Prague to all virtual speakers and participants. I'm very glad to be part of this timely event, and I would like to congratulate the organizers, the European Institute from Romania, for choosing such a topical subject and for focusing on really, I would say, one of the issues that are gathering global attention, energy security, which, as Mrs. Mocanu already mentioned, is also a priority of the ongoing Czech EU presidency. The priorities of the Czech presidency of the EU Council were deeply influenced, and rightly so, by the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So actually there was a complete reshuffle of those priorities once this war, illegal and brutal war at our borders started. So this is why and how the energy security also became right from the start a top priority of the Czech presidency, with a focus on the need to reduce energy dependency on Russia and to diversify sources of supply. I would say that our Czech hosts and friends managed well these difficult discussions that took place at the European Union level, with a record number of extraordinary energy councils meeting and at least one more to come in November. And also, I think it is quite telling that energy was really the main topic during the recent informal European Council in Prague, but also during the newly established European political community that had the first meeting here in the Czech capital. So it's become somehow the one of the really main topic of attention of this presidency. I would highlight some results that I think shows that the European Union can deliver in times of crisis, as it happened also during the COVID pandemic. I would not enter into the details, I will leave this to the specialists, but I think that there are results during the Czech presidency. Most recent measures for curbing energy prices were adopted based on the Commission proposals, were adopted on the 6th of October, so quite recently. These are directed towards reducing the energy consumption, but also towards capping the revenues of energy producers, which are not using gas as a primary source. Another important development is the introduction of a temporary solidarity contribution aiming at the profit of companies active in energetic sector. And there are some other proposals that are still discussed that are on the table, so not yet adopted, like the separation of electricity and gas prices, releasing the emission allowances from the market stability reserve, and also the possible joint purchases of gas or possible price capping. Those last subjects that I mentioned were at the center of the discussions of the informal energy council that took place this week in Prague. But of course, as we know, during informal councils, decisions are not formalized, but they are prepared for later stages for the formal councils in Brussels to adopt those measures when there is a consensus, of course. I think that all these measures and discussions are aiming at very important objectives that should be further pursued, which is making the energy market more resilient. And resilience is also very much linked to the energy situation of Europe. One of the lessons during these times, I think it's that member states really need to work together and to give a strong message of unity and coordination. And because I mentioned this need of coordination of the member states, I would like to briefly mention why this subject is also very relevant at bilateral level. And I see here a great potential of cooperation between Romania and the Czech Republic. We are like-minded countries with regard to both energy security and the green transition. And this is because this is based on very evident reasons. We are countries with similar structure of our national economies. We have both a strong industrial base with a very powerful automotive industry, and we are both export-oriented industries, export-oriented countries. We have the same views also on with regard to the energy mix, including the use of nuclear energy. We both see this nuclear energy as a key component for obtaining energy sovereignty. So having so much in common, we see the challenges the same ways. We have the same priorities at European level, and this gives a lot of room for coordination and for cooperation between our two countries. But referring to the title of today's debate, by the way, very smartly chosen, of course, we can ask ourselves whether there is a contradiction between assuring Europe's diversified resources, and the ambitions of the Green Deal agenda. Personally, I would say that the two objectives are not in opposition, because tackling the current priority of energy security in times of not only of crisis, but in times of war, does not mean that the EU is abandoning the green agenda. I think what is needed is to adapt it to the current geopolitical realities and to somehow perhaps sequence its implementation to basically to find the best modalities to move further, but not to abandon the green objectives. Just to summarize my short intervention, I think that energy security will certainly remain a top priority at European level. I think we can safely say that during almost 4 months of the Czech presidency of the EU Council, there was progress. I think we have seen the ability of the EU to stand united and to act together to find solutions. I would close my introduction by reminding the fact that in any crisis there are also opportunities. And in the case of energy security, I think the opportunity is and should be to have an energy independent European Union, including by way of a smart and well-designed green transition. So I think the two are actually complementing each other. I wish you all a very fruitful and inspiring debate. And again, I'm very happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barta, for your introduction and for putting in context the issue of energy security, and also on giving us a summary of the main results of the negotiations. You also rightfully mentioned the need for coordination among the EU member countries and the importance of the bilateral relations between Romania and the Czech Republic, and also the need to see the opportunity in any crisis. Thank you once again. We hope we will continue our cooperation and organize future joint events on topics of interest. Let me now give the floor to Mrs. Tatiana Iosiper, Special Representative for Energy and Climate Diplomacy in the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Iosiper, we are very glad to have you as a guest today, and we kindly invite you to tell us a few words about the topic. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Oana. Thank you for inviting me. It's a very timely topic, and as my dear colleague Ambassador Antoaneta Barta just mentioned, it's a topic of high priority for the EU. It's been on the agenda of every meeting, every council, and we're grateful that the Czech presidency is putting such a priority on this issue, and their leadership is highly appreciated on this. I'm also very happy to see a lot of participants that are some of our colleagues in the ministry, in the embassies, in other institutions. I am also delighted to greet Radu Martin and Katerina Davidova. It's always a pleasure to see such interesting perspectives that are brought together in a debate like this, and thank you, European Institute, for organizing this. As I was listening to my colleague, I realized that we have very similar messages, and that's actually not by chance, because we do reflect the same positions and we have the same perspective. So I hope you will bear with me, because some of the things that I will say were already mentioned by my colleague. But I will also try to bring another issue, and I hope it will be discussed later in the panel, of also the high energy prices and how we deal with this, and what effect energy prices have on the climate goals. Dear participants, the most recent developments in the energy field require the acceleration of steps to eliminate as soon as possible the EU dependency on the imports of fossil fuel energy resources from the Russian Federation and underscore the need for the EU to take further measures to increase the security and resilience of our critical energy infrastructure. The measures adopted by the EU in response to the energy crisis, including the results of the last European Council and the other energy councils that have taken place recently, have highlighted the power of the EU unity and solidarity to protect its citizens and contain the rising energy prices. The speed and determination of the EU member states in adopting these decisions are a clear proof of our strong solidarity and resilience. We have two aspects of the current energy crisis that we need to tackle: the security of supply and the high energy prices. Where does Romania stand? Romania supports the adoption of accelerated and effective measures to manage high gas and energy prices because they cause inflation and they have a cascading negative effect on the economy. We also need to address in an expeditious manner the issue of the energy market design, in the sense of decoupling the price of natural gas from the price of electricity. This measure is necessary to ensure that the diversified energy mix and low-cost technologies are reflected in the consumer's final bills. We also support the introduction as soon as possible of a cap on natural gas transactions in the European market for imports regardless of origin and for domestic transactions as well. In this respect, it is important to activate as soon as possible the European Energy Platform for the joint procurement of natural gas, so as to ensure a fair distribution of the additional volume of gas and LNG attracted to the EU. You probably know a regional platform in the Southeastern Europe has already been started. There was a coordination meeting in Sofia in May, and the work is going on again to try to make this platform operational as soon as possible. In order to strengthen the security of supply at the national and regional level, Romania supports the development of new energy production capacities by maximizing the use of internal energy sources. And the key word here is internal energy sources. Romania will continue the development of projects in the field of renewable energy with an additional of 6.9 gigawatts planned by 2030, of natural gas by continuing the extraction from the onshore and offshore projects, and also the nuclear field by completing the Cernavodă nuclear power plant and by implementing SMR technology. Romania supports a technology-neutral approach requiring the use of all carbon sources to achieve the objectives of energy independence and decarbonization. You probably know our target for renewable energy sources in the energy mix by 2030 is 30.7. It will be revised upwards probably to 34%. And as you all probably very well know, the level of ambition in the European Union is being pushed higher and higher. The European Parliament even supports a 45% share of renewable energy sources in the energy mix. From a European perspective, we also stress the need to complete interconnection projects in order to ensure uniform access of all member states to additional gas and LNG deliveries, as well as the use of EU funds, including in the light of the REPowerEU plan for new energy generation capacities. The Russian aggression in Ukraine had a profound impact on the energy policy agenda of the EU. I think it was a stress test for our energy market. The Union had to address the issues of market design anyway due to the changes brought by the green transition. It also had to take appropriate measures to really diversify the sources of imports and routes and prioritize internal production, not just imports. The Russian aggression changed the order of priorities and brought these issues to the top of the energy policy agenda of the European Union. So how do we achieve energy independence and security of supply, and are these efforts having an impact on our climate goals? Again, we should strengthen the energy independence by increasing internal production of energy and by reduced consumption through increased energy efficiency. Romania will focus on gas, as I just mentioned, as the transition energy source, nuclear, by investing in renewable wind, solar, and as well as hydrogen. Gas and nuclear are part of the EU taxonomy. I know there are different views in Europe about that, but we believe that without a clean, emissions-free nuclear energy, we cannot meet our climate goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Even if there's still a lot to do, Romania, we are one of the most ambitious countries in the region promoting renewable energy sources, and we managed to decouple the energy growth, the economic growth from the emissions. Our green objectives are not negatively impacted by the energy crisis, and Ambassador Barta mentioned that also very, very clearly. The need to resort to coal, for instance, it's temporary, and we emphasize this. It's a temporary resort to coal, to other fossil fuels. We keep our commitment to phase out coal. In Romania's case, that is 2032, and the ETA's allocations so far are the same. More so, I believe that the high energy prices will encourage a reduced consumption and will encourage also the resort to cheaper renewable sources and implementation of energy savings and energy efficiency measures. Despite the current difficult context, I think we have very good prospects to be successful in our effort to cut off completely Russian energy imports. So far, Europe's dependence on Russian gas has fallen sharply from 41% to 7.5%, and I think it will be reduced even further. And this is thanks to cooperation and dialogue, and alternative solutions have been found. International Energy Agency is somebody that I follow really closely, and they are looking into the impact of the energy crisis on climate commitment, of course, on a global scale. And the recent report, I think it was presented by Fatih Birol last month, concluded that there are more signs than ever that the new global energy economy is advancing strongly, and that today's energy crisis can be a turning point toward a cleaner, more affordable, and more secure energy system. And the current crisis, it is indeed a turning point, and I think this is the main message I think that I would take away, that the opportunity that was mentioned before is here. It's a turning point. What's going on right now? If we look at the numbers, we see a new global energy economy emerging. The governments around the globe have responded with substantial spending. In the European Union, we have 210 billion euro by 2027 in the REPowerEU. Similar programs have been passed in the US or in Japan, and this will foster low carbon energy sources, will reduce dependency on fossil fuel, and reduce emissions. The impact of the current energy crisis is long lasting. The measures we envisage today in response to the Russian aggression will reduce our strategic vulnerabilities, will increase energy security, and will pave the way for further emissions reductions in the years to come. This is a moment to build upon the decisive action and solidarity that we displayed during the pandemic to address the challenging moment that we face today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a lively debate later on.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your insightful comments on the topic, mentioning the sensitive issues of security of supply and high energy prices, also the energy market design and the role of the International Energy Agency, and the importance of the solidarity. So thank you once again for your participation and contribution to this debate, and we do hope we can build together future topics on energy that will be of high interest both to the general and to the specialized audience. And now let me give the floor to Mrs. Corina Murafa, affiliate expert within the Center for Democracy Studies, a well-known Romanian energy and climate policy expert and enthusiast, I would say. Dear Corina, we kindly invite you to introduce the experts panel, to moderate the discussions, and most certainly express your opinions on the matter. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Juana, and thank you, Your Excellencies, for bringing up the strategic and diplomatic perspective. I liked your usage of the word enthusiasm, because I think it is something that we are deeply lacking and we still need. Perhaps I wouldn't say enthusiasm, but if I was to paraphrase Cristiana Figueres, I think in this whole multiple crisis situation, biodiversity loss, climate change, energy prices spike, inflation with a potential towards recession and so on, plus the war in Ukraine. So I don't know, maybe 6-7 crises at the same time. I think we probably need to get a sense of stubborn optimism. That's what Mrs. Figueres was saying in one of her books, and I really liked that that phrase. I will seek to organize this conversation as lively as possible, and looking at who's in the audience. I do have a feeling that there will be many questions and comments, which is great. We've already received some in advance from those that registered for the conversation, and they're quite punchy, I have to say. And we have with us 3 speakers that are going to be with us for the next hour and a half. Not all of them, unfortunately, so I will prioritize a little bit the moderation of the debate, also based on speakers' availability, as everyone needs to deal with multiple crises at the same time. So I will hand over now to kick us off, perhaps not with a focus on the very technical issues of the Repower EU package and the Czech presidency's plans, because I do think that I know that Katerina and Eugenia will focus on those, and Mrs. Ambassador also described in great detail what we're talking about and what's being put on the table. But let's perhaps discuss from the perspective of public communication and crisis communication, how to deal with this topic, which used to be at some point within the realm of the experts. You know, it was debated in closed circles, this whole energy conversation, and now it's on TV roughly every 20 minutes. So I will ask our guest Radu Magdin to reflect a little bit on how do we handle as society, as decision makers and so on, this energy crisis, and what he has been observing as dangers, but also as potential ways out of this crisis from a communications and strategic perspective. Radu Magdin, for those who do not know him, is a global analyst and consultant. He's a former prime ministerial advisor in Romania and Moldova. He's a frequent writer on global leadership and communications, and since 2012, the chief executive officer at Smarlink Communications, where he advises people and organizations on how to best manage crises and reputation. So a very good topic for today's perspective. Radu, please kick us off a little bit, and we also hope to have some time to take questions for you and then move us on to the other speakers.
Gladly. Thank you so much, Corina, for the introduction. It's an honor to meet you co-panel with so many interesting people, and we have complementary expertise. We live in a very political world, despite of crisis. So, as you can see, sometimes shallowness comes in first. And although normally, including in strategic communications, we say that substance should come first, and then the style and the spinning, due to some calendar aspects, we enter first via the Stratcom arena. Thank you once again to the organizers. And let me start by congratulating the Czech presidency for a very efficient strategic communications and a very courageous strategic communications for a presidency. I think it does a brilliant job. Although it's hard during a new presidency to differentiate in terms of political communicators at the highest level of the state in between the, let's say, the national hat, and of course here you have more flexibility, and the European hat. I think they're doing a brilliant job. Overall, as a club, from this perspective, we're safe. Where I think the playground is now open is more at when we're entering the institutional or interinstitutional fights, which are in between us normal. In any kind of policy in Brussels, if we were to move in a specific direction based on a specific crisis, And of course, now you could say that crisis is an opportunity and you have momentum for decision making. Nonetheless, looking at the complexity, of really ensuring next level energy security, while you're also under immediate pressure, to secure supply, literally in a lot of the capitals in Europe, it's not always easy to give reassuring messages, to the citizens, to be always very constructive in pan-European communications, and also to ensure another layer of communications where I would like to draw your attention to, namely the one in between, not only the one in between the government and the citizens, but also the one in between the government and business, the private sector in the field, and the one in between the private sector and the citizens. Because if we were to avoid a so-called winter of discontent, part of the discontent comes from prices, rising prices. Separate from inflation, I think where energy becomes very concrete for citizens is when you receive an invoice, right? For the sake of clarity, speaking of strategic communications, I've tried to assemble several trios, starting with different letters. So let me first start with R, which comes from typically resilience, and offer you in this sense 3 words: resistance, reliability, and resolve. I think in the current context with Ukraine, with Russia, we have an agreement, a pan-European agreement in terms of resolve. Also, us specifically from Eastern Europe, and here I include both a Czech and Romanian audience, but also people in other capitals or cities, we are also pretty resistant. So I would say that while we aim for resilience, in the meantime, we're honestly in the weeks and months to come just resistant or trying to be resistant, and I think there is a lot of debate in capitals, in this trio, in between government, citizens, and business on what's the best way forward. Separate from that, I think that by getting burned in this crisis, in terms of expectations, where we thought we were, how ambitious we were, and what was immediate reality, separate from long-term climate issues, I would say that reliability is another R, which is very, very important. Because if we diversify, how we diversify, separate from one of the arguments which we keep hearing in different capitals, the one on pricing, right, including complaints from different capitals in Europe on, yes, alternatives, options, but at a pricey, at a high level. I think reliability will be increasingly important. I would like to propose you the letter S, which comes from, I would say, storytelling or strategy, and put on your radar 3 S: speed. The current need for speed is very much, let's say, on the radar of stakeholders, perhaps to a level where a second S comes in, namely the sacrifice. Sacrifice sometimes of consultation, sacrifice of process. And here, I think in the weeks to come, there will be, if I were to adjust an expression we have in Romania, we would have to, in a way, slice the cat, and take some decisions in the next few weeks, because there is a need for all this government to have continued public support, but also to support the other component of support, to support the population, to go beyond any kind of, let's say, winter discontent in reality. Another letter to propose is G, coming from green, as in the Green Deal. And here I would like to put on your radar great, grave, and gray. I think the situation for the moment is grave. And yes, speaking of crisis and opportunity, what we are assembling, not necessarily these weeks, but in the months to come, and this is the beauty of Brussels, once it's in motion, good things happen. Although it takes longer, I think we're heading for a great future. But in the meantime, it's still negotiable, including in terms of strategic communications, how much we are in gray land. I say this why? Because there is an inconsistency. And here, also in the, I think, European Council, there should be a certain level of agreement in between leaders, because you can't really have such a palette of messaging. Some prime ministers and presidents come and say like, oh, you said 1 winter, 2 winters. No, it's going to be like 10 winters, you know, and then you really scare, you know, the population at the pan-European level. And then on the other side, other people are overly optimistic. And I think we need to at least agree on some kind of a middle ground and start communicating this in the future. Speaking on one final letter to finish with this, I, coming from industry, because I believe industry also plays a key part. You know, it's not just government. Honestly, we are still Europeans and capitalists. So there is also industry involved, although natural population expectations are from governments, right, in terms of crisis to act. Speaking of industry, I would say there are a lot of initiatives, and we're talking also about investment and innovation. But here, speaking of pricing, I think we can't be overly populist in politics. And this is the final P, you know, in between policies, politics and populism. And we can't accept simply for us to say that for the sake of citizens and pricing and any winter of discontent, we totally ask, if we enter a realm where we ask those who are supposed to innovate and invest side by side with states and during our resilience plans, to ask them to do such a sacrifice, you know, and simply, you know, enter any kind of profit bashing. Yes, we need balance, but at the same time, let us remember the rules of the game, the different layers in society. Thank you so much once again for your time, and I remain open for any kind of questions or comments. Thank you.
That's exactly. Thank you so much, Radu, for your thoughtful intervention. That's exactly what I wanted to ask our audience, to type in questions in the chat if they do have them. And while Radu is with us, because he needs to leave a little bit earlier, I'll make sure to take them. But I do have one question for you, Radu, before anybody else types in one in the chat, which is. How would you advise a prime minister, or let's say maybe the president of the commission, to communicate publicly unpopular decisions, which, however, are much needed for the resilience of the system, for the reliability of our energy system, and so on and so forth. And to give you just one example, these measures around demand response and reducing energy demand, lowering temperatures in public buildings and in buildings in general, but also this perspective that we should, let's say, also be responsive somehow to the prices and not just rely forever on and admit the fact that for quite an amount of time, unless we enter a huge recession, prices are not going to go down.
So much for the question, and I would try to reply with 3 E's. One is enthusiasm, energy, as in energy, because if we are depressed at the political level, at the stakeholder level, you know, we're not going to be able to move things, shake things, change things. So I think stakeholders across Europe, including you know, Mrs. von der Leyen, which I think she's doing a great job from the perspective of enthusiasm and energy in times of crisis. I think you can only lead in difficult times if you project an amount of confidence which comes from your personal energy, and the energy, and even though it may sound weird that I'm saying enthusiasm, I mean by this the style of how you're saying things, like we will cross the Rubicon in a good sense. We will manage this through. We will. This is the first component. The second component, I would say, lead by example. I think politicians across political leaders, you know, to frame this in a more beautiful way, you know, political leaders across Europe should really be careful at the next few weeks and months, because people can be patient, you know, and we have people's attention clearly. I mean. European citizens are much smarter than our politicians think, irrespective of the level of education. People understand that the situation is dire. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are ready to accept the equivalent of a disastrous situation, you know, but people do understand the need, and they're gonna conform. whether it's some of us in Eastern Europe, who are having recollections of the 80s, and we're finding different creative solutions, from a bottle of something, to an extra sweater, whether it's somebody who is doing this because out of the results of a very socially conscious, smart campaign to nudge people, for energy efficiency, it doesn't matter as long as it reaches the objectives, and it also depends on the talent of the storyteller. And third of all, separate from any kind of style issues, I would say exit. It's really important to show an exit. The fact that a path forward, because if we're just asking people, to make efforts, but we don't seem to come up with solutions, and here, separate from the difficulty that we have around the table yet to actually agree on the plan, I think it's the second difficulty comes into how do we say it, right? But first, of course, you need the policy and so on. But I would say enthusiasm, example, power of example, and exit. I think it's for political leaders and administrative leaders across Europe. I think it's really, really important for this winter to be a very modest winter. And because if people have the feeling that some of us are taking the bill, and some of us aren't, then there will be reasons for discontent. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to take questions after the other speakers. I managed to find a solution to stay all along. Thank you once again.
Oh, great. Thanks, Radu, for letting us know. I do definitely think that for those of us who read European media and so on, it is really a pity and a disappointment to see all this internal bickering, all this internal fighting, not able to come to an agreement. And as you rightfully put it, like the lack of a path forward and of an exit in sight, because we don't have it yet. I was reading just the other day on how we are questioning increased renewables target, and many member states are fighting those, while others still believe that this is the way forward, and it really is unclear which is the way forward. And this allows me to make a segue to our next speaker, Katerina Davidova from the Europeum Institute for European Policy from the Czech Republic. It really is important, I think, to bring to a predominantly Romanian audience also the perspective of peers in Eastern Europe and of Europe in general, because Europeum is a non-profit, non-partisan and independent think tank focusing on European integration and cohesion, and focusing as well on an active engagement of the Czech Republic in the European Union. It undertakes original research, organizes public events, educational activities, and formulates ideas to improve both the European and the Czech policymaking. And Katerina, who's with us today, she's a senior fellow at Europeum, focusing on energy and climate. She holds a master's degree in American Studies from Charles University in Prague, and she also deals with issues related to transportation, which is a very hard to decarbonize sector, as we all know. Katerina has prepared for us a little bit of an overview of these latest proposals that are on the European conversation tables. And perhaps I'd like her to also focus on how strong is this dilemma, or how real or how false it is between decarbonization and security, and how does the Czech presidency look at this? How do other member states look at this? Katerina, please, the floor is yours. And in the meantime, remember, our dear members of the audience, that you can always type in questions in the chat or raise your hand, and then when we get to a Q&A moment, I'll make sure to call you on stage to ask the question. Please, Katerina.
Thank you very much, Corina, and also thank you to the organizers of this event for inviting me. I actually hope I'm not the only one that we're speaking English because of me today, but maybe that's the case. So
no, we don't have only a Romanian audience. Don't worry, it's a mixed audience, and this is important as well to have a conversation.
Yeah. No, that's great. And first of all, like I would maybe just react to something that Radu said previously about the strategic communication of the Czech presidency. I think they would be very happy to hear that they're doing a good job. I agree they're doing a really good job, I think, on the EU level. Actually, the government has really stepped up. Unfortunately, on the domestic level, their communication is not so good. I think it's often the case if too much focus is on the EU affairs, then not so much focus can be put on the domestic affairs. And there has actually been several demonstrations already this autumn against the government, precisely due to the rising costs of living, rising inflation, rising energy prices, and so on. So yeah, but I do agree that on the EU level, the government so far has been doing a good job in these uneasy times. As Corina said, I prepared a short presentation, so I'll try and share the screen right now. Okay. Please bear with me. If it doesn't work, then I can just okay. There we go. Yes, now it should all work. And slide. All right. There we go. So it will all come down to answering the main question of today, like how the energy security and the green energy transition, whether they go against each other or whether they are in line, and whether the green energy transition should actually be boosted as a result of the war in Ukraine. I just put together a few graphs of the recent developments. So here we can see that the imports of Russian gas have really dropped to the EU, especially those of the pipeline gas. Most of it has been now replaced by either gas from Norway or LNG gas from the US, Qatar, and other non-EU countries. So that is good news. If we look at the percentage share, that's maybe perhaps even clearer view that we see that the percentage share of Russian gas flows into Europe has really diminished over the past year. If, however, we look at another variable, and that is how much the EU is paying for Russian gas, that unfortunately remains almost at the same levels as it was over last year's summer. And it's because the prices of gas have gone up. So even though the EU is now importing 75% less Russian gas than it was last year, we are still paying roughly the same as last summer. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And ideally, I think the EU should really wean off Russian gas altogether and find replacements in other countries, but also focus on reducing the demand. That is also one of the core agreements that the member states have come to, that the EU should reduce its gas consumption by 15% by March 2023. And more recently, they also agreed to reduce electricity consumption by 10%. That's an indicative target, and by 5%, that's a binding target in the peak hours. So I think when we talk about the solutions to the current energy crisis, I think we really shouldn't forget about reducing demand, increasing energy efficiency, doing everything we can to improve, for example, the state of buildings so that they're more energy efficient, and really help people and companies to save energy, because to me, in the short and long term, that is the most viable solution to this crisis. And of course, it goes hand in hand with the proposals for the green transition, such as the Fit for 55 or the Repower EU proposal. I will get to that in just a couple of slides. This is also quite recent calculation done by Bruegel, It shows how each country has reduced, or how the consumption of gas has changed this year compared to the average between 2019 and 2021. So we see that some countries have really reduced their gas consumptions, while other countries have actually increased it. If we look at the breakdown of who was mostly responsible for the decreases, it is mostly industry in most countries. It's a bit hard to do the calculations because the data is different in every member state. But it's so far, it has been mostly down to industry. Households are a bit hard to count yet before the winter, so we will see how this winter will impact this table. I know lots of governments are now introducing some measures to actually help the households cut their consumption over the winter. There's also been a huge uptake of heat pump installations and other replacement to gas boilers. So that's also a positive sign, but we are still nowhere near the 15% that was agreed. This actually all adds up to roughly 7% reduction on the EU level. Now, I wanted to also show this graph because we have already mentioned here how the homegrown renewable energy is really important for us to tackle both the energy security crisis, but also the climate crisis that is still ongoing. And this shows just over this summer how EU solar generation has gone up, partially due to the war already, partially due to the ongoing policies that were part of the EU green targets. But it basically led to an uptake of 28% of solar power generation in the EU, and that has saved Europe something like 29 billion euro on the gas imports that didn't have to happen thanks to this. So I think I'm really getting to my answer and my view on this dilemma, whether energy security and energy transformation can go hand in hand. And I do believe that, yes, the answer is they can and they should. And the faster we manage to switch to more renewable energy sources and also to boost our energy efficiency in the coming months and years, the sooner we can really get rid of Russian gas for good. Because I don't believe that the gas prices are going to come down significantly, because even if the war ends, there would still be a huge demand for gas from non-EU countries such as China and India, etc., who have now sort of taken over some of the Russian supplies from Europe. And after the COVID pandemic, they will probably see an economic upturn. So I don't think we can rely on cheap Russian gas in the future anymore. And we should be looking at ways of replacing it for good, not just for a few years while there is the unfortunate war. And it's really coming to an end now. This is a calculation done by Amber think tank on how the EU can actually completely replace Russian gas imports by 2025. This was done at the beginning of the war, but it's still valid today. So the combination of the already existing proposals in the Fit for 55 plan, together with additional measures, such as the ones that were then presented in Repower EU, which increases the targets for renewable energy to 45%, and it increases the target for energy efficiency. All those can help us reduce the demand for Russian gas, and then roughly 1/3 of the pre-war imports would be replaced by gas from elsewhere. This is just another view on the very similar topic. So how each of the EU proposals would lead to the reduction of gas consumption, not just from Russia, but gas overall, which I think it's important to mention that it's not just about gas from Russia, but some of the new suppliers are also not democratic regimes, and there might be more troubles in the future with that. And gas is still a fossil fuel as well, even though it has, of course, lower CO2 emissions than coal. We shouldn't rely on it too much into the future. And this is also some projections of how the EU electricity mix might look like in 2030. So the Fit for 55 was counting with more gas to replace coal. Now the REPowerEU is actually counting with more coal to pick up the missing the gap in gas imports. Here I would just like to say that, of course, we might have to use coal more than we planned, especially in the short term now in the coming winter. But I think that really we should keep the coal phase out dates as they are and try to work towards them. And more importantly, I think we shouldn't cancel policies such as the EU ETS, which actually sort of equalizes a little bit the environmental impacts of coal by putting the price on the carbon emissions of coal power. So even if we do use coal a bit more now instead of gas, I think we should still keep the existing policies in place and use the revenues from the ETS to further help the decarbonization of European energy mixes. And that was my last slide. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to discuss this further and answer your questions.
Thank you, Katerina. There is a clarifying question which I'd like to address right away, and perhaps you could go back to your slide that was showing the way different categories of consumers have reduced their gas consumption in 2022 compared to 2019, 2021. There's a question to asking you to spell that out a little bit better. I also think, I don't know how the calculations were made, but 22 kind of still has the winter months ahead of us. So how would you read better that graph, and why maybe is that industry/power, industry/household? How are we to understand this?
Understanding. Sure. So again, the sort of mixture of the different categories is because for each country there were different data, and they not always showed exactly the same category as the others. So this is sort of a way of like putting it together and still showing the change in demand. And I would like the main messages I would take from it is that in most countries, industry has been using less gas than in the years before. That's one message. In power generation, it actually hasn't really hasn't really changed that much, apart from a few countries. And in some countries, it actually increased in power generation. So that's not good news. And when it comes to households, yes, as you say, like the crucial time is coming now for household gas consumption, and that's the winter. So we actually have some tough months ahead, because if we think that over the summer we managed to reduce our gas demand by roughly 7%, and by March we want to reduce it by 15%, but the winter is now approaching. I think it will be interesting to see a similar graph during winter and afterwards. And I think that without some really like strong measures being put out by the national governments, it's going to be quite hard to get to the desired reduction this fast. And it's also because, of course, the governments are thinking about their citizens, and they don't want anyone to freeze. So they're enacting these measures to help cap the market prices, so that people can afford to heat their homes. But at the same time, whenever you cap the price, you're sort of reducing the effect that it would normally have on savings. So I would say that all these measures to cap the prices, they should always come with also complementing measures that encourage the households to save. So giving them some bonuses for saving, or calculating the cap, not making it absolute, but maybe calculating it based on a previous average consumption and so on.
Fiscal credits for people to reduce their to replace their utensils in the house, and heaters and boilers and so on and so forth. I think there could be a number of measures which, for one reason or another, many member states have not taken, and instead resorted to price caps, which, as you said, are not sending the right signal. I think it's also the graph probably also tells another interesting story, which is around the transformation of our economies, because it's not due to response to demand response measures or to savings measures that industry in many countries has reduced the gas consumption during summer, but it is purely because gas was too expensive and they were not competitive enough to produce with those gas prices. I think this has been the case in Romania. If we look there, where the country where the greatest reduction has come from industry, which simply was not competitive enough to face external export markets because of the high gas prices. And I think there is a question about what kind of industry are we going to have into the future, given that high energy prices are here to stay, and industry reduced production and implicitly consumption because it's not they're not competitive anymore at these high prices, and most likely they're not going to be into the future either. So I think this whole energy crisis actually drives a very interesting and wider transformation of our industry in at least Eastern Europe and these energy intensive countries. Thank you, Katerina, for going towards this graph, because our audience is wondering why solar and wind are not put in this graph. Perhaps it's the methodology, or I don't know. Could you explain?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, this comes from Politico, from a recent article, which actually argues that the war in Ukraine will speed up the green transition of Europe. And I think this graph was only to compare gas, coal, and nuclear as the sources of electricity. So it just doesn't include renewables, just doesn't include them at all. I don't actually know why. But as I mentioned before, if the REPowerEU proposal is accepted by the member states, then there should be a target to reach 45% of renewable energy share in 2030. So there would be quite a significant addition to this.
I think the overall assumptions in different models now in the European Union is that electricity generation will not decrease, but it will increase in the long run in the European Union because of increasing demand somehow, because we're electrifying all sorts of sectors, from transportation to industry production. But I think the expectation is that for the remaining portion of that bar, the last one on your slide, and all the way up until above 2K, that's to be replaced by renewables. But it's probably that Bloomberg and the Commission haven't put it in that one. If anybody wants to have a question now for Katerina in the chat or by raising your hand, please let me know. But we do have another speaker with us as well that I will introduce now. Oh, Johan has a question. Mr. Johan Richter, please do address it, and then we will move on to the last speaker and hopefully continue the conversation. And please unmute yourself. Now it's good.
Thank you. Very interesting. And yes, Katerina, I understand you're bound by the information that you have. I was only raising that issue because also in personal efforts, I've just installed on the balcony some solar installations. So I'm following also what this means in a small production. Yeah. But the conclusion now, after 2.5 months, including a day gray as today, rainy over here, it is still producing energy. And the assumption is from an installation that is really tiny. Yeah, we are speaking about an investment of around 1,000 euros. You can produce roughly 25% of your energy you need per year. Okay, still the winter months, I haven't any ideas, but I've seen gray days where still energy is produced. So I think part of the effort that needs to be done, maybe less in countries where people don't have the same means as in other countries, but I think we need to step up that there is also more private investment by those who can afford this. The second thing I found amazing is that, at least here in my national context, it was quite a struggle to find out what are my rights as an individual to invest here, because there are still measures to protect the energy producers. So you are already bound by limitations what you can produce. And I think this is something that our governments urgently need to look into. This comes from outdated times and is counterproductive. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Jochen. I think that's, sorry.
No, I just wanted to invite you and Radu to reflect on that. How do we make this transition towards energy policy, which was, if I am to paraphrase, Jochen, a little bit your question, I think energy policy has always been made with stakeholders in mind, like large energy companies. But now the situation is completely different. We really need to have the citizen at the core of energy policy, and not only in terms of ensuring low prices for the citizen, but also encouraging them to be active actors. And how do we make that? With regulation and mindset at the end of the day that was targeting just the incumbents. Maybe you care to reflect on this formulation of a question that I was able to pick up, Katerina, and then Radu, and then we move to Eugenia.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think that's really the crucial question here. Like we see over the past months, there has been the demand for renewables, especially for solar power, driven by the consumers, the households, the companies that are trying to cut their energy bills. But the regulation doesn't reflect it yet. Like the government has been very slow to react with changes to this change on the market. For example, in the Czech Republic, we still don't have a law that would define what energy communities are and how they can enter the market and how things can function and so on. So there would actually be so much demand from the citizens, from municipalities and so on, to do something about their energy bills and becoming more self-sufficient, but they can't because there is the missing legislation. So I think without that, it's going to be very hard to move forward, and it needs to be solved very fast.
Thank you, Katerina. In Romania, we have a law which is just a translation of the European directive, and nothing more in terms of anchoring it to the policy here and to the legislation here in Romania. It's not a transposition, it's a translation, as I like to say. Radu, from your advisory perspective, how do we change this discourse? And by the way, Radu, in Romania, I was talking yesterday with some suppliers. The increase in this between this month and last year's month in prosumers that are connecting to the grid is 600%.
It's huge and it's normal. And I think in order to avoid panic, we need some planning. and so I'm going to propose to you some switches, from panic to planning, or from the future to the present, because I think the basic pitch should be to move from what we had in the past as in good to have or cool to have, like save the planet, do what's responsible, right? To the need to have, right? And the basic choice should be something like moving from planet saving to population saving and present saving, right? Because you're sticking also the right thing to do, let's say in a wider term, but you're also in a way forced, although pricing is an issue, to adjust quickly. So we need to frame this as an offer we can't refuse. Not that we shouldn't refuse, but that we can't refuse. Because again, in between something which is good to have and something that I really need to do, perhaps we don't really have a choice. And the only option is the percentage in between, solar and wind, and what's in handier, or the options in between to come back to gas, Norwegians, Americans, Qataris, Emiratis, Azeris, and so on. So this would be my thing, move this energy sector from nudging to necessity, because up to now, when we're talking about, particularly about renewables, it was the nudge, right? And the not the need, not this aspect. It's easier said, like I said it, than done. But I think this is the way forward, right? Simply explain to people that it's not about being cool. We have no choice, right? And we're going to try to package this in a way which is good for the citizens first, particularly in crisis, right? The government and the industry. Again, I stress this triangle, because although the basic need for citizens is expectations from the government, I already identify into part of the messaging, including in Romania. We have rediscovered this word, which is, I'm not sure, perhaps you can help me. How would we translate in English, sorry, specula. How do we say specula in English?
Let me give it a thought, but I'll get to you.
Part of the message.
Speculative behavior, I guess, right?
Speculative behavior, right? And I think
malicious speculative behavior.
Malicious speculative in data, right? So the moment when politics comes to a market, which up to now has been semi-regulated, semi-laissez-faire, laissez-passer, we leave this debate for the technicians of the market, and comes and say, like, we see malicious speculative behavior, it's not easy, At the same time, unfortunately, we live, at least my perception looking at communications in Romania, in a great reality, because we are in a rabbinic dilemma. Part of the people who should be getting their money from the states can say we're right, because there are some delays in terms of cash flow and payments toward these people. At the same time, industrial players in the market saying we are not getting offers at what they call a decent, if I wouldn't be forced to say the right price, because there is no such thing as a right price nowadays, right? It's not an easy match. But again, to sell this, it's about the need, not simply about the nudge. And this is the way forward.
Complex. So let's move on to Eugenia Gushilov, the latest speaker in our panel today. Let me briefly introduce her to you for those that do not know who Gina is. She's the director and founder of the Romania Energy Center. She's an experienced analyst with a demonstrated history of working in think tanks and industry, skilled in international relations, policy analysis, energy quantitative analytics, holding a degree from Columbia University in international energy management policy, and the Romania Energy Center, indeed, founded in 2010, is Romania's first English language energy studies think tank, an independent organization like Europeum in the Czech Republic, specializing in international affairs, area studies, analytics, energy market fundamentals, energy economics, and so on and so forth. I will ask Gina to reflect a little bit with us around how does this Repower EU package and the subsequent communication from the Commission land in Romania? What are some of the aspects that are favorable to our current energy situation? What are some aspects from this package that we will have lots of trouble with? How do we overall position ourselves as a country, and how should we position ourselves as a country from your independent expertise perspective in this situation where it seems that there's a chorus of voices and not at all a tuning of the song?
Thank you, Corina. Hello to everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today. I will address in a minute all of these questions, but I would like just to link with the previous discussion so we can ensure a certain flow to what we have discussed with previously up to this point. I too think that there is a resistance that we are seeing from the past to the future. And what am I referring here to? I'm referring to the fact that there is a certain behavior that is very, visible, perceivable in the market of the, let's say, old business model of producing and consuming energy, which is rejecting the new model. I'm talking about the old model, which used to be centralized power generation and then, you know, distribution. But now we are in this entire paradigm shift in which we are moving towards distributed power generation, in which, you know, anyone, you have a house, you can become a micro producer, small producer. And I think our governments, again, the situation does not present itself the same in all the countries, but let's say some governments more than others, let's say extremely reluctant to embrace this model and to move towards the future. So think about Romania. We have an energy sector which is dominated 3/4, 75, we approximate 80% of the energy sector is dominated by state-owned enterprises, which were built in the 70s, in the 80s, mostly. They have mostly missed the renewable boom and revolution that we have seen and has actually unfolded in Romania, starting with 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, so except from Hidroelectrica, which did make some investment in small hydro capacities, the rest of the state-owned enterprises, well, there may be one more exception with OMV Petrom, which, let's say, state-owned companies or companies not state-owned, but in which the state has a minority stake. They did build some renewable projects, but for the most part, if we're talking about the co-producers, they were absent in this revolution and embracing of the renewables that we have seen happen in Romania between 2011 and 2015. Now facing with their imminent demise, because they risk bankruptcy and disappearing from the market because they can no longer benefit from state aid, they now embrace in the, let's say, 11th, 12th hour, they embrace renewable energy. And they are doing this, and I see also in the way, for instance, the modernization fund in Romania, the way it's structured, and there are non-competitive, let's say, calls in which the money is already allocated. It's skewed towards state-owned enterprises. So let's say the conclusion would be that the systems, the energy systems of the past are using the funds, you know, that are meant for the future to protect this centralized power generation system. What we don't see in Romania any focus on, let's say, rooftop solar. Not so much, very little, like insignificant almost. But we have seen a focus on utility scale renewable project. That's what took off in Romania. But rooftop solar, not so much, although the potential is huge. We don't see any serious talk about installing heat pumps. Why? And this is something that could be funded, including through this modernization fund. No, this is not happening. Why? Because heat pumps would empower the consumers. Heat pumps fit into the model of distributed power generation, in which power, you know, is moved from the hands of the state-owned assets and enterprises into the hands of the consumers. So here is indeed this huge tension, and it's unfolding at the moment as we speak. In the way, you know, some funds are allocated into building this future. Money is given for Complexul Energetic Oltenia, our coal-fired producer, electricity producer, to become green, although it was not interested in becoming green, you know, 3 years ago, no interest at all. So we have this. On the other hand, we have, coming back to your question, Corina, on the REPowerEU, what's, you know, the pluses and minuses for a country such as Romania? I think it's great that it gives a sense of urgency of investment that need to be sped up in such areas as renewables or green hydrogen, let's say. You have there like an increase of ambition of hydrogen produced from green energy compared to the target in the Fit for 55. Again, REPowerEU stresses a crucial role for heat pumps. So the EU wants to install 10 million heat pumps by 2025. Again, why do we not hear any talk about these heat pumps in Romania? Because they are a priority under REPowerEU, yeah? The resistance of the system, of the centralized system. Then I would like, and one good thing that is happening is that, for instance, on the renewable projects front, Romania had set for itself a target of 6.9 gigawatt of renewable capacity by 2030 in its national energy and climate plan. But due to this available funding that we have, it seems that this target will be doubled. Yeah, because there is money available through the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, there's money available through the Modernization Fund. So this is one piece of good news. But what I would like to stress, and in terms of the issue that we have in Romania, one of the big obstacles in deploying the new infrastructure, the infrastructure of the future, is about speed. We need to speed things up. And if this crisis that we are in has taught us anything, is that we need to move faster. Going back to the Repower EU, Corina, I think one thing that is that Romanians and Romania does not like and is not good for us as a country is the fact that the EU is short-sighted in not stressing the urgency of using natural gas reserves, proven gas reserves in those countries that have these reserves. I mean, we talk about hydrogen, we talk about biomass, about other things, but there is no mention of domestic production of natural gas. Domestic, I mean EU-based production of natural gas. Yeah, because if in this crisis we are allowing to, and we are closing our eyes for a couple of years and restarting our coal generation capacity in Europe, then I see absolutely no reason for us to not consider, the domestic production of natural gas in those countries that have these gas reserves. And this is Romania, this is Netherlands, this is Greece in its offshore, at least countries that I can think about right now. So this missing point in the Repower EU, I think, is not good for us, is not good for Romania, and is not good for Europe in the current crisis. The other good things, and I would not want to repeat what the previous speakers have said, is that there is a new awareness of the importance of nuclear to be played in achieving this, decarbonization goals. And I do think that we need to understand that this crisis that we are in, with this huge crisis, this is an artificial crisis. We need all to remember why all this is happening. It's not because the gas is not available, geographically, or it cannot be produced. It is available. Yeah, it can be extracted from the ground. It is because one of our key suppliers, Russia, behaved in a completely medieval, style, barbaric act, which are incompatible with the century that we're living in, and which are incompatible with the status of a European country. Yeah? So this is why we're having this artificial crisis, not because there is no gas to be supplied. So keeping that in mind, I think that we need to, let's say, reprioritize how we use energy and reshuffle a little bit, let's say, our actions in the immediate term. Yes, we still want to achieve, carbon neutrality, and we are phasing out coal, but because of this situation in which we're in, and we should live under no illusion that we are not in a war. We are in a war. The fact that there are no bombs dropping and rockets in Bucharest or in Prague doesn't mean we're not in a war. Look at the prices, and that will tell you that we are in a war. But we need to reconsider some things, at least short term. And if we were able to do this for the coal-fired power generation for at least 1 or 2 years, definitely natural gas production should be also up there among the top priorities, because I think it's not a smart policy decision to not utilize whatever you may have in terms of domestic natural gas resources that you could produce in such times like the ones that we're living in. More aggressive with the deployment of the renewable targets, because we're still embracing that, we're still going in that direction. So I see no reason why we should move slower, we should move faster. And when I think about that, I think about the speed at which we are moving in Romania. Yeah. So,
Thank you very much, Eugenia, for these remarks and for putting a little bit Repower EU in the Romanian context, highlighting this perspective of legacy versus new energy system. Maybe as a follow-up question towards the gas issue, we've also heard from Ambassador Iosipă before the focus that Romania has on this, and perhaps just as a challenge to you, how do we look in terms of time horizon to this situation? Because arguably, keeping coal, some coal plants for a year or 2 or 3, it's a short-term crisis solution. But focusing on new assets and new infrastructure for natural gas would take us to anchoring our energy system in fossil fuel gas for the next 10 to 15 years, when the target is complete carbon neutrality by 2050 and so on. So perhaps it's a question of time horizons and the idea that you do not want to have stranded assets. Of course, you know, the domestic gas that you already are exploiting, the power plants that are already fired with domestic gas, I think that's a different question. But if I did understood you correctly, you referred to new reserves and why it would be strategic to exploit those and why they're not in Repower EU. Well, maybe this is the question of the long versus short-term time horizon, and perhaps you could share with us some thoughts on that, then I will move on to questions in the chat, because there are some.
Yeah, very briefly, sure, there is this tension, and it seems that you know, for a moment there, we're abandoning you know, the goals and the drive to deploy more renewable energy. But it's only temporary. It's temporary because Europe as a whole, and you know, its component EU member countries, we need to gain some time, some breathing room, in order to deal with these short-term problems, immediate problems, which you know, are problems that can lead to huge demonstrations. People going outside and protesting in the squares. They can topple governments. This is not a, you know, the security of supply issue is not something to be taken lightly. And it has potential to create chaos in Europe. So we need to calm down the, let's say, the spirits and the prices in the short term. So to solve the security of supply question first, and then get back to the energy transition. You know, again, it's not something that we pause completely, but just in a short term, 1, 2 years, 3 years at most. You know, just to give us the breathing room to put in place those projects that will help us to move away from this point. Now, again, we are not talking about, you mentioned carbon lock-in, but as long as the issue is now about replacing the source of gas, so where this gas is coming from, it doesn't mean that we are solving the issue, the most pressing issue. I mean, the assets that use this natural gas, some of them cannot be replaced, and they are still in place, and we do not have the replacement ready for them. So as long as we are still importing this natural gas from America, from Norway, from Qatar maybe, that means that our assets that we still use and use in the short term are still reliant on natural gas. And if that is the case, then why not, you know, up a little bit the domestic production of natural gas? So instead of importing it for some countries, maybe some countries could also contribute to their domestic production. This is all I'm saying. And the fact that we're moving towards this renewable future doesn't mean that we will not have oil and natural gas in the mix in 2050. We will have it. It will not be absent. It's just we are trying to offset the damage and to minimize, to, you know, as much as possible the damage to the environment. But we will still use oil and natural gas, you know, 30 years from now, because it's you know, with all the ambition that we're seeing right now, changing so dramatically, the energy systems will not go according to plan, no matter how good are the plans that we put in place.
Thank you for your reflections, Eugenia. I think the debate on that can continue for a long time, and the investor community definitely has some perspectives around the signals that they need in terms of where to invest, and that they need more clarity in the game rather than go for everything that's available. So I personally believe that this is why we need to be more clear about the target rather than say, you know, we're postponing it a little bit, maybe let's see how it goes. But there are questions in the chat. I will tie together two questions that have to do with prices, there is a question or a reflection rather coming from Mr. Mihai Liviu Danila, who is asking how come we are having these huge power prices and despite the fact that the production prices are low, and he's considering that this whole market system and all the intermediaries that are between the producers and the supplier are causing through, you know, what Radu was even saying earlier, this speculative behavior, the increase in prices. And Mr. Lazia is asking also a question around the pricing model of power in the EU, which is why does the EU, 8 months into the conflict, stick to an outdated model of pricing the energy, marginal cost or prices cleared, which was introduced in times of peace in order to incentivize renewable producers. Does anyone want to dig into this question? You know, what's the underlying cause of the huge price increase that we have seen in the European Union, whether it's speculative behavior or an outdated pricing model or both, and why is it taking so long to have a new model in place for pricing power in the EU? I'm not going to name any of you, Katerina, Eugenia, Radu, whoever feels they want to
try to
contribute with an idea, please.
On the pricing model of the EU. This model, as you well know, was put in place to help deploy renewable energy in Europe. It has worked, and the European Commission continues to rely on this model, which is seen as critical to get us through the energy transition, because it would allow us to rapidly test on the market, new technologies. So that's let's say value added in the eyes of the European Commission. However, you are perfectly right to point out that these are not normal times, and in this current crisis, wartime, which we live now through, this model is hurting us more than it is helping us. So the Commission, I think, and the Brussels institutions will have to decide what is more important: security of supply in the short term or energy transition in the short term. Because if it's energy transition, then the Commission will keep this model. If it's security of supply, that means that emergency measures need to be proposed, considered, analyzed, maybe implemented. And one such measure could be the temporary severance of the link between, let's say, electricity price formation and natural gas price formation. Or it could be a temporary reversal to the pay-as-bid pricing model. That means that let's say the consumers, those who buy electricity, pay the price that is requested by the seller or the producer of electricity, which is usually based on a cost-plus calculation, what it costs for you to produce this electricity, plus a certain margin, which is different for every producer, because it's not the same cost for the producer who produces 1 megawatt of electricity from hydro than it is for a producer who produces 1 megawatt of electricity but from coal or from renewable. The cost is different for these producers. So I think that one potential solution could be a temporary reversal to the pay-as-bid mechanism until we get out of this crisis and prices come down, and then we can get back to the marginal pricing mechanism when, again, energy transition becomes the priority. But now, in the current situation that we are in, I think this model is doing more damage, and it's really hurting us more than it helps us, because energy transition I think, should take a backseat to security of supply for the next 2 years.
Thank you, Eugenia. Radu also wants to step in. I thought I saw his hand up, Radu, please. And then I will move to the other questions as well, and the hand which is risen.
Very, very short comment on my side. If our pan-European leaders prioritize energy transition without results in terms of pricing or some sense of protection this winter, they're going to pay so much in terms of political price, so it's a very hard sell. People can understand that there can be some very rough weeks or months, but I'm simply saying that the accumulation of crisis, which we have right now, separate from, because we have already had inflation, right? The long fear economic consequences of COVID, right? So 2020, we had COVID. Then we're starting to discover inflation. Now it's war of all kinds. So it's not the right moment in time for the audience to listen to something very merry, very happy, and very far away. So unless politicians are very pragmatic and very concrete, I'm afraid they're going to be burned in terms of polls by spring. So this is my word of caution. Or they have somebody very, very creative on communications from another planet, or they really have to admit that these are the times we're living in and prioritize.
Thank you, Radu. There's a question up from Mihai Madalin Sandu. If you could ask it live, because I assume that's why you have your hand up.
Yes, hello. Can
Please.
You hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to ask a question about a more, let's say, controversial topic, nuclear energy and the possibility of transitioning to nuclear energy. What about this idea? And would you, this is directed to everyone that wants to answer and intervene, would you consider that it could solve a lot of our problems and, let's say, satisfy the need for energy? Also, I'd like to hear what your opinions are on the rejection of nuclear energy by certain countries, either in EU or overall, such as countries such as Australia, Denmark, Norway, even Germany. I wanted to hear why do people oppose it, considering that nuclear plants today are and the risks associated to it are not the same as those in the past. Of course, there are still risks, especially and negative factors, especially when we're talking about radioactive waste and how we dispose it. But in my opinion, I think that we are getting better at it, and in the future it will be better.
Thank you very much. I think the question is quite clear, unless you want to add another angle to it.
No.
I'm just mindful of time, so I'd
yes, of course.
invite one of our speakers to answer it, whoever feels more competent around the nuclear question. Perhaps one point that I may take the moderator's privilege and add to the nuclear conversation is not only the rejection based on environmental reasons, but I think it's also a question of the pricing of nuclear energy. And from my analysis of the situation, there's a certain very clear reason around the high investment costs for new nuclear in Europe, which has deterred some countries that were not opposing nuclear from an environmental perspective to go ahead with their investment plans. And I think the UK is probably the most known point in case. But curious to hear what other speakers feel about this ambiguous perspective that we have in the EU when it comes to nuclear.
Yeah, I can maybe quickly comment on that. I see it very similarly to you, Corina. I think the main question now for new nuclear is the economic viability of the projects and the prices of the projects, because they are very expensive. You usually need some governmental assurance for the future profitability of these projects for the companies. And they take a long time. So, for example, even though the Czech Republic is very pro-nuclear, the public opinion is very pro-nuclear compared to Germany and Austria, which are our neighbors. So there's even been troubles because of that. But even though you could say Czech Republic is one of the most nuclear friendly member states. We are now having troubles with our plans to prolong the life of our existing nuclear power plants. And if the plants actually do materialize, the new blocks would be online in 2040s. That's the earliest that can happen. We still don't have a solution for the nuclear waste either, for the permanent storage of the nuclear waste, which is the precondition for the taxonomy, to actually be able to brand it as a green investment. There needs to be a solution to nuclear waste, and we don't have that. And yeah, just the economic situation of it is so unfavorable right now that, I mean, I would say in general, don't switch off the existing power plants, but looking at new projects across Europe, they're going to take decades to be built, and that's not going to help us with the current energy crisis. So I think we shouldn't put too much attention to it now as a short-term solution, because it isn't.
Thank you, Katerina. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Because if not, there's other questions that I want to address, which were raised. Please.
Quickly add to what Katerina has said. Definitely, nuclear is not a short-term solution, because it takes time to put in place, a nuclear power plant or even a small modular reactor one. Here in Romania, we are not a country that is against nuclear energy. Romania is in fact one of the 14 countries that support nuclear energy as a solution for climate neutrality and for reaching the climate goals for 2030, 2050. So there is no opposition to nuclear in Romania, as there is no in Czech Republic.
But there is no new nuclear.
There's no new nuclear. That's the problem.
30-something years.
That's the problem. There is no new nuclear, and we have trouble again. Speed. The speed is very important. How do you move with with a certain project? Because these are big strategic projects that require coordination. They span different governments, so it's not during the duration of one government alone. And we seem to have trouble with how fast we can move. I mean, in the sense that it's a minus for Romania from that point of view. But again, it doesn't mean that we should abandon nuclear projects as a solution that could help us to reach the climate targets. That's the beauty of the EU. We still have the power, each country, to decide what we want to use. And those countries that want to use gas should be allowed to use it. And those countries that do not want to use nuclear, again, should have the freedom to not build nuclear projects and solve it with other energy sources.
Thank you so much. A question which is a little bit broader, and perhaps that's where any of you can step in, Radu, as well, from this strategic communications perspective. A question that we've seen in the chat from Jochen Richter. It was mentioned earlier that too many diverging interests have led to a lack of conclusions on how to deal with the energy price situation. I think tying a little bit also into this question that Mr. Lazia posed earlier, why it's taking so long to reform the market. Could you spell out a bit more clear, what are the explanations for these main issues which seem to not make us swim in the same direction, and that lead to these diverging interests? What is really at stake, and why are we not able to pull our act together?
Well, I can start again. So I actually think that some of the measures have been approved on the council level. So the majority of member states have agreed to them. For example, the revenue cap on the sources of electricity that are like cheaper than gas, so renewables, nuclear and coal, or the solidarity contributions from the fossil fuel companies that have been making huge profits this year because of the higher prices. So we do have agreement on that, and now it will actually take some time to implement it. Of course, it's always takes time with the EU to implement things when all 27 member states have to do it. But at least there was agreement on this at the past energy councils. Where we see the biggest contention now is regarding the price cap on gas imports. There is already, I think, 15 to 17 member states that are actually in favor of that, either on all the gas imports or specifically on Russian gas imports. But notably Germany and the Netherlands are against it. They're the ones who recently issued a non-paper which sort of called for different solutions to that rather than the price cap. I think one of the biggest fears is that if we do a price cap on all gas imports, then of course those who are importing LNG into Europe won't feel the incentive to do it anymore, and they would rather send their supplies to other countries that would be paying higher price than the EU would. So that could actually endanger the security of supply of gas to Europe this winter. When it comes to the Russian gas, then I think the biggest blocker would probably be Hungary, which has always blocked anything that would target like Russia specifically. It might also be considered as a form of sanction, and then it would have to be approved unanimously. So that would be the biggest problem, I think. But I see that after the last Informal Energy Council, there is much more support for the joint purchasing of gas. So I do believe, just like Ms. Ambassador has said before me, that like this is a good solution, and that should definitely be sped up and put into practice. So.
Which for me is quite miraculous that we haven't done anything on the joint gas purchases, although that was on the table from the very beginning of the year. And maybe I can jump a little bit with a question towards Radu, because I think he can reflect quite wisely on this. It ties into what we just debated a little bit earlier, in the sense of why is it so hard to come to a consensus in the EU now around the energy crisis. And I was wondering, how big of a challenge is this crisis to European unity, to the European project, to the European Union itself as a construct, given that, you know, our host is the European Institute in Romania? I think this is a bigger question that's worth addressing. You are muted, Radu. Or no, I think I just lost you. Sorry.
I changed headphones in the meantime. It's okay?
Yes, now it's good.
Thank you so much. When we started the initial introductory remark, we were talking about style, spin, and substance. And one of the basic dilemmas is, how do you make it in terms of style and spin? The difference being like the angle with which you want to take the debate. Difference is a vision on the substance, because what happens is, in terms of energy, and I totally agree with Eugenia when she said, thank God in the EU countries have still choices, right? And what we can do, because this eliminates part of the tension. Imagine, let's say, for example, Romania, who has Nuclear Electrica and will do even more with SMRs and so on, like this, being told, or speaking of spinning from Brussels, not to do nuclear, or to do, more solar, or to do more wind, or less water, less hydro, having also Hidroelectrica preparing an IPO and so on. So choices are there. I'd be looking at the different positioning of the major states who have communicated. And I think that what we have seen is enthusiasm. We've seen a legitimate prioritization of supply. And I think this is where the political class is right, their instinct is right across Europe. Let us make sure that we fill in the tanks, to put it very, very, very bluntly, right? That we have reserves, will it be, I think, speaking of the cohesion of the European project in energy, like in others, and I'm one of the optimists as regards the EU, because we don't have a choice. Speaking about necessity, I mean, the quantum leap, towards baking the project, it's simply not tenable. We have no choice but to move forward. Even if sometimes to move forward, we're going to literally have the smallest common denominator, but we're going to advance and then we're going to have enough flexibility. So I don't worry about the European project. I think that our leaders have learned something, that the fiber of European society has already been damaged by the economic crisis, 2007 to, it's hard to put it, 2012, 2013, 2014, depending on how you felt it, 2015, and so on. Now COVID, the economic consequences of COVID, and now war de facto at our borders, or war on the energy market. So I think the instincts are right. We're going to make it, but don't expect strategic steps in the next few weeks. I think, first of all, because our legislative process in Brussels and so on is like that. And one more thing that I would like to stress, we saw this, speaking of alleged speculation, but also commitments of the states. We see this also as regards Ukraine and the help towards Ukraine. Friends, cash flow is king. I don't want to put this capitalist, but beyond our talk, beyond our strategies and so on, it's really important that Europe does not only talk about financial commitments, talk about big investments in the future, but make sure that a quick cash transfer, either to states or to some specific project is being done, because in crisis, cash is king even more. I think we're going to make it. I'm optimistic, but I think it's already, we're talking, it's too much of a bubbly talk, the coherence, and it's too much of an elite talk, the coherence of the European project. In between us, this time Citizen Rado talking, I mean, who cares about the cohesion of the European project? We have invoices to pay, our kids have to go to school, we're going to get them some extra clothes to make sure that it's not too cold inside, We still don't know if it's going to be any kind of COVID wave, although we have this joke in Eastern Europe that, with the occasion of the war, Russia kind of also killed COVID, at least in our part of the world, because we reprioritized in terms of how we feel danger to our immediate safety and so on. So I'm optimist. There is more talent to be done. And I think that one of the countries which has been more talented, let us move the praise this time from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, has been Germany. Germany, who has been moving from a country, has been on the defensive, bashed for its links with Russia and its energy connections and so on, to a country who sometimes complains about expensive American gas or other options, but at the same time, they invented Zeitenwende. They used the crisis as an opportunity and they came forward. So again, a lot of optimism, but don't put everything on the shoulders of Brussels, although Mrs. von der Leyen is very presidential and can do a lot of things with that mantle.
Thank you very much, Radu, for this general remark. We're close to being at time, but I do want to read out a comment from the chat regarding the earlier conversation around gas, which is important, and it comes from a reputable energy specialist in Romania, Otilia Nuțu, who's saying that for her, it's incredible that, at least in Romania, if I understand correctly, Otilia, but perhaps not only, we do a lot of incentivizing of gas consumption, which produces this lock-in effect that I was also raising a little bit earlier, grids and power plants and so on and so forth, instead of incentivizing where there are resources, the gas production, given the fact that for better or worse, as Katerina was saying in its intervention, even after the war, there's going to be a very high gas demand from outside the EU. It wasn't a question, it was just an interesting spin around the gas conversation that I wanted to bring up, but there is a small question for Katerina, which I think she can answer quite fast. It was also on my mind. Mr. Ștefan Cătălin Urioc is asking about that reduction in gas consumption graph that you've explained in greater detail, Katerina. That probably it's been the reduction in the industry is market driven, not policy driven, unfortunately, in the sense that simply businesses shut down and thus decrease their consumption. And is there any data on how much of that decrease has been efficiency driven or just freezing of production? I don't know if probably the answer is not, but I just want to check with you.
No, thank you. Definitely that's what we should be asking. Like, I looked around the data for industrial production for the past quarter show that it has been slightly down by like 2% or something. So that wouldn't explain the whole drop in gas demand by industry. So I would say that it's like partially a drop in production, but partially, as you say, it could be some efficiency gains. So of course, I think the private sector is quite flexible in reacting to the price signals, much more, for example, than the households. So I think that, yeah, I would say it's maybe half and half, but honestly, that's my guess, not based on any data. Sorry, I don't have any more.
And I think data reliability and comparability is a huge issue in the European Union that we haven't yet addressed. I would like to sincerely thank all our speakers, Radu, Eugenia, Caterina, for such interesting comments and conclusions, and for your stubborn optimism at the end of the day that we can make it happen, and that we can be smarter around the policy choices that we make. I would like to now pass the floor for the conclusion, for the bye-bye remarks and conclusions, first to Mrs. Ambassador Barta and then to Mrs. Oana Mocanu from the European Institute in Romania. And thanks a lot to all of the very attentive listeners and engaged audience that we've had despite the online format, or maybe because of the online format. Thank you so much. Mrs. Ambassador?
Yes, thank you very much. From my side, really many thanks for what I think it was a very rich discussion, which shows the importance of the subject, but also I think the need for follow-up. And so I wanted to just to offer the possibility to have an in-person follow-up here in Prague. Why not? I think I'm not saying big words, but we have one of the most beautiful embassies of Romania abroad here in Prague. So we have the space, the needed space for such kind of events. And because business was mentioned, also business perspective was mentioned during several interventions, we can think perhaps of a format that would include a business perspective of Czech-Romanian perspectives on energy security. So I would be more than happy to host such an event in the future. Thank you all, and it was really very interesting to hear, to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. And now to Oana Mocanu from the European Institute. Thank you for hosting us, though, because you were an online host, and thank you for the invitation to move to physical formats as well. Oana?
Thank you, Corina. Thank you for your excellent contribution today and for facilitating the dialogue and all the discussions. It was indeed a very productive meeting, and with lots of questions, dilemmas, but also answers, I think. And I do believe that the energy topic is an extremely resourceful one that claims to be repeatedly addressed. Special thanks to all the speakers and to the participants. And I do look forward to our future events on major topics on European agenda. Thank you, Your Excellency, for inviting us in Prague. And I do hope we can organize future joint events together on different topics, not only on the energy security one. Many thanks to my colleagues from the communication and studies units, and most of all to my colleague Florentina Costache. Thank you, a big thank you, Flori, for the initiative, organization and efforts so that this new project of ours might be a success. So wishes of good health to everyone and all the best, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.